ash, and people don't know this. If you look at a cookbook prior to 1880 or so, where the electric revolution, maybe even through the early 1900s, anywhere in the world, any culture, their recipes called for culinary ash. These are the fine white ashes at the center of the fire pit. All of the other stuff, the black soot, the sooty ash around the edges of the fireplace or the stove, whatever it is, that was considered inedible. So they'd take all the black ash and they'd put that in the garden, throw it out the window, whatever, in the compost heap. Somehow it's building up around them. But that white ash was a way to cut flour and cut salt. And pretty much every culture in the world, don't want to get into salt yet, but civilization basically revolves around salt. So salt was very valuable and very expensive. And people would cut their salt with wood ash, up to 10 times as much ash per salt. So 1 unit of salt, 9 or 10 units of wood ash to cut with flour. Breads, puddings, meatloafs, noodles. You know, the reason why the noodles, the rice noodles in Okinawa, the reason they're yellow is because of the ash. And actually in Okinawa, there would be an ash merchant that would come by and buy your extra ash. And they would sell that ash to farmers. We figured it out that it was a fertilizer. It was a very, very good fertilizer. And it was a free byproduct of our lifestyles. Again, this whole thing, we just simply needed heating and cooking. So we just had to burn stuff. And we had this ash left over. People figured out how to use it. They figured out how to eat it. And they figured out how to add it to their soil, and they figured out how to sell it as fertilizer, frankly. So there's a whole economy around ash that basically disappeared when we started damming these rivers. So that was a double whammy. Stopped flooding the fields. I know this is kind of a long explanation, but like this is it. If you understand this, you understand why modern food is different. You understand why we don't have nutrients anymore. So we no longer flood the fields, and now we got electricity, so we no longer got fire. We no longer need fire. We no longer have pounds of wood ashes, pounds of plant-derived minerals every day. And the last major thing that they used is bones. Bones. I'm writing this down so I can follow along myself. Bones. Natural humans eat the entire animal. They eat it snout to tail. They eat the organs. They eat the muscle, right? We say meat. Meat just means muscle. We're supposed to only eat the muscle. We need to balance these factors out, and that can actually get quite complicated, that explanation of why. But the point is we tried to use all of the animal. I mean, natural humans, they just had to stretch the value from everything that they had, right? They used the skins. They made water bottles out of the skins and shoes and hats and all kinds of stuff. They used the entire animal. They ate the ears. You know, they would boil the hoofs, right? They would make soups from the bones. They would leach those nutrients out of the bones into soups, which would create broths. Those broths would be eating this stuff all the time. So when they're eating the animal, they're eating the muscle, the organs, and the bones. After the soup, after most of the nutrients were left leached out, you know, all the special components of the bone matrix and the bone marrow, you know, they'd eat the bone marrow with a spoon or put it into the dish. Delicacy in pretty much every culture, by the way. It tastes phenomenal as well. Then they've still got what's left over of the bone, and they would grind that up. They would grind that up into powder. So when we think of flour-based foods now, bread now is flour plus sugar, maybe an egg, you know, flour, sugar, egg. Well, they didn't have processed sugar back then either. Both of those things required milling. Means you'd have to have a milling machine on a river, right? The river turns this big gear, turns another gear, turns a grinding stone. That's a pretty expensive, complicated setup. One mill would usually serve an entire township. So all the farmers in the township at harvest season, they'd all use that one mill. The point here is that it's a lot of work. If you didn't have a mill, you would have to pound it by hand, or you do it with a draft animal, like a donkey or an ox, right? And the donkey or the ox would just walk around in circles all day, turning a grinding stone, grinding up the grain or the sugar, whatever it is. But the point is they were limited to how much of this stuff they could consume, these white powders. They were limited to how much of that stuff they could consume based on how much they could grow and how much they could mill and how much energy they'd want to put into it. Could you imagine if you had to mill yourself all of the flour that you consume, right? You probably wouldn't consume that much flour. And now, I'm here in Texas, a homeless person could stand at an intersection in Texas, begging for change, and they could still afford to eat processed flour and processed sugar 3 times a day because it's super cheap, because this is one of the miracles of modern agriculture, that we got this very bad ingredient very, very cheap. But the point here is that a bread in the old days, it wouldn't be flour plus sugar plus egg. It would be like, instead of it being a cup of flour in the recipe, it would be like a 1/3 cup flour, a 1/3 cup bone meal, a 1/3 cup wood ash, right? And one of those things is bad, the grain. The grain has problematic proteins in it, especially gluten. It's one of the reasons we recommend avoiding it. But it's got these 2 awesome ingredients in it, right? These 2 other ingredients are super nutrient dense, and one of them is pure plant-derived minerals. So they're just beefing up their breads and their puddings and their soups and all this stuff with plant-derived minerals. And bones are phenomenal as well. Not only are we made of, like, our bones are made of bones, right? It sounds very simple, but like, we wonder why we have so many bone diseases in our society. And those nutrients, that nutrient group, the calcium family, we don't like to just call out calcium, but sometimes I do. I don't mean it to sound like it's just calcium. Bones are about 65% calcium. There's other minerals in there as well. The magnesium, the boron, strontium, key minerals that we require. All these are essential minerals. But there's over 200 diseases in the physician's desk reference that are directly linked to this calcium deficiency, calcium and cofactor deficiency. So we wonder why. Even though we solved this problem 1,000 years ago in China, by the way, by feeding livestock bones and joints. That's how they did it. Grind up bones and joints. They'd feed it to their animals so that the animals no longer got bone and joint problems. And so they produce enough eggs and all this stuff.